fear category, which includes perhaps, I want to say maybe 17,000, 18,000 actual derivatives in English, is way up in all of the government sites. And if you notice, we have an entirely different tone in, quote, leadership than we had, say, in the previous Depression. If you were to go back and analyze all of the speeches that came out of FDR, the language he used was calming, attempting to get everybody to cooperate, so it was in a calming, cooperative vein, whereas all the language out of Bush is hurry, hurry, fear, fear, hurry, hurry, fear, fear. And it's been that way for these last 8 years. A decidedly different tone than what we had in the 30s, so that we know that we're dealing with a different set of circumstances, and our leaders, quote, our leaders are being pushed into different kinds of control mechanisms than we'd seen before. We see a lot of this in our language work because basically that's all we do is compare emotions that are coming out in various different forms on the internet. And it's actually rather shocking to see our government and officialdom trying actively to induce fear in the populace. And it gets even worse than that because during this last, quote, bailout, or the first one here in September, when they were really pushing it, there were the threats to the, not only to the populace, oh, be afraid, we don't know what's coming, unprecedented, you know, all of this nasty language about the economics, but they even took it so far as to try and impress on Congress people, do it or you know, be afraid, basically, that we're going to go ahead and declare martial law. And this was prior to the elections, and the ramifications of which would have been entirely unknown. So not only is the fear language being used on the populace, it's also being used on the popular representatives. However much they might be part of the mainstream power elite is immaterial. The fact is that someone up there thinks they have to control those fellows with fear language as well, which is another indication, really, that everything's getting out of hand.
Mm. And that didn't seem to bother anybody too much, other than a couple of them that testified about that.
Correct.
Very interesting.
Most of them, I think, are in the what I would call the permanent political elite class.
Right.
So we're really at that stage of, say, the Roman Empire, where the Senate, which had been a body that just in essence elevated people out of the lower house, out of the plebeian status temporarily while they were senators, finally became an entitled, privileged position. We see this as the fourth generation, as, you know, Carolyn Kennedy is going to take over Hillary Clinton's seat, etc., that sort of thing. So, and as a matter of fact, we're dealing with current President Bush, who is the unelected. Bear in mind, he was selected in the year 2000. He never was really elected.
Right.
But he's the unelected son of a former president. That's the same situation as they have in North Korea, with the various, and also we've seen it in other places where we've had dictatorship like that. So there's no real difference between the dictatorship in the U.S. and the dictatorship in any other country, except for the sheer size of the situation that we're dealing with. And our political elite class has to be viewed that way. So it really starts coming down to some of the other broader themes that we're seeing in our data, like the burgeoning movement that we're calling the planetary populist movement.
Oh, that's a good one. Let's stop right there and take a real quick break, and then we can continue that without interrupting you.
Okay, sounds good.
You're listening to Clif, halfpasthuman.com on Beyond the Ordinary, and we shall be back.
We're back with Clif, and he's going to utterly curdle at this, but Nancy and I are getting, not only are we more awed by the amazing amount of work and how goes into it, what goes into it, but this guy's a genius. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay,
now
we'll
uncurdle and come up.
Yep. Okay, so it's come up, and we've laid that to rest, and we'll just go on.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing is that I'm really anti-elite down to a level that would shock people. And as a subset of that, though, we must be intellectually honest and apply that to ourselves, because the life unexamined is not worth living. And so I have to say that, yeah, I'm a smart fellow, but I'm not necessarily smarter than a lot of people, and most people have things that I don't. So it's not like I really like the idea of special or elevation or anything that's ego stroking. It really just gets in the way, and it's part of that whole Taoist kind of complete reality school sort of thing. If I'm out there stroking my own ego, then first I'm going to fall into this cult of personality trap. which traps the people that are at the celebrity level as well as those around them. But then also it gets in the way of the work and appreciating the universe for really the intense, surprising creation that it is. I don't want to project that stuff on myself, and I also have to be real careful not to put it into my work, because my own personal views could very easily be, and I'm sure they are involved in the interpretation, but they could be much more prominent than they are now. But getting back to our...
Well, let me tell you, though, to me, genius is not only having taken the time to read, to study, to know, to learn, and continuously do so, but the ability to put many abstract things or seemingly unrelated things together to form a bigger picture, which is, to me, what we have to do in self-examination. It's like Nancy was talking about earlier, and not go, ooh, this is bad. You just look at it and say, oh, okay, is this something I can change?
Yeah.
Or do I want to keep wallowing, for instance?
And we know whatever it is we created, it's our reality we're creating all the time. So, yeah, we could change it if we find it what in ourselves created it.
Yeah, it's very difficult, though. You know, I see a lot of people that say blithely that, oh, well, we can get humans to change this way and that. And having gone through a transformational period of time for myself, I understand the incredible amount of emotional energy and effort that is required there.
Yes.
Also, as a radical linguist here, I have to point out that genius etymologically derives from a central word gen, which is also the source for generous. And that's the way I view genius. So Buckminster Fuller was a true genius, because not only was he a smart fellow and talented, and see, I think of myself as smart and talented, and to a certain extent I'm developing genius, but a genius is truly generous. And I'm getting there, but people like Buckminster Fuller and these others are very true geniuses because they're generous to the absolute fault. And I'm not quite that way. I have a nature that is martial and a little bit fierce and perhaps revenge-seeking more than it should be, and that intrudes a bit. But getting back to the talent here and putting things together, there's this radical Irishman out there by the name of Michael Sarion, Tsarion, who has been able to he's extremely talented and extremely smart. I don't know about genius, but one of the things that he does say in there is that you've got to start accepting the dark side of yourself and use the power that's inherent within that, even though you may not be able to change it. And I'm starting to agree with him there, because things in the data appear to show that we're coming to a period of intense confrontation globally. I'm not saying necessarily a World War III or something along those lines, but certainly a few years where confrontation and militarism, all of those sorts of nasty tension sorts of things, will certainly rise up. And we'll all need a core of strength to get through this and to be able to plot our path and do it in a universe-harmonizing, karmically good sort of way, because there will be many traps for us to fall into going into the dark side, so to speak. Make sense?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, that's actually where our global populace movement sort of takes off from. There's the whole rumor, and that really we don't have any direct attribution other than a few of the elites, but there's the whole rumor about the desire of an elite population to go along with, say, the Georgia Guidestones and reduce our planetary population down to 500 million, which they figure would be enough to support them in the splendor that they would like. I would dispute that. I think they need all of us to keep them at the level of comfort that they enjoy at the moment. But in any event, the idea is there, and then we have all of the nasties like chemtrails and the new diseases like Morgellons and the SARS and some of the others, the bird flu and the threats of pandemic. And the threats are useful, but underlying the threats, on the theory of where there's smoke, there's fire, we have to look down deep, and indeed there are many threats to the populace as a whole on the planet. And that may be the germ from which the planetary populace movement picks up. Although at this point it appears that a lot of it will be economic, because as the dollar dies here over the year, let me briefly say that in our work it seems to suggest that sometime before spring the dollar will be pretty much defunct, and the federal government will start defaulting on its obligations, and the dollar will then go into a nasty tailspin and continue to the point where there's a contraction in the amount of employment within our federal government, consistent with the dollar actually becoming more or less only a currency used in the U.S. At that point, the ratio of the planetary population of 6.8 billion and about 2.8 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood, trying to live on $2.50 a day or less, will suddenly swell up to maybe 4 billion people on the planet trying to live on $2.50 a day or less. Many of them will be in the developed world, and they won't like it very much. And this is going to push political kinds of interlocking that really threaten the elite, that they used to rail on about the interlink. Years ago in the 60s and 70s, they would say that, oh, well, terrorist group A is related to terrorist group B in another country because we've caught two members talking to each other and exchanging, tips or whatever. Well, that kind of scenario is just going to bedevil them throughout 2009 and 10 because a planet-wide movement for omni-humanity is showing up in our data stream as a